What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here with the Wednesday 1 hour and 30-minute Megamix. If you guys are enjoying these longer videos and the daily videos, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, as doing any one of those helps the videos to do well and ensures the channel does well too. That way, I can continue making these videos for a long time to come. As I've been saying, I've been getting flagged a lot lately for inappropriate content, so if you guys hear any censored words or anything like that and are curious, that's why. It's really been affecting the channel, so if you'd like to support the channel further, you can go ahead and click that join button somewhere around the subscribe button. It's only $2 a month at the minimum level, and you get a special emoticon next to your name when you comment, and special emoticons you can use when you comment as well. Of course, no content will ever be locked behind the paywall. It's purely something optional you can do if you wish to support the channel further than you already do. Just watching the video is a great help in itself. Anyway though, guys, without further ado, I will get right into the stories. Hope you guys enjoy them, and I will see you again at the end of the video. Have a great day. Not too long ago, actually, I was driving back home late one night. I had visited a friend of mine who moved out to the sticks. It was always a long drive, and I was feeling more tired than usual this night. I decided to try out for the first time a shortcut she'd previously recommended to me. It was really dark out this night. The stars and the moon were hidden behind thick clouds. I took the shortcut my friend had suggested and headed down a narrow country road. There were no streetlights down this road whatsoever, so it was quite hard to see my way. I'd always avoided this shortcut because I hate driving down dark country roads, but I wanted to get home quicker than usual. It was so late, and I had work in the morning as well. I thought of what might happen if a car were to come from the opposite direction. We would be stuck there, as the road was only wide enough for one vehicle. Just as I was mentally taking down notes to call out my friend for this terrible shortcut suggestion, I noticed something up ahead. It was faint to begin with. It almost looked like a stick that was glowing, swaying from left to right. I wondered what this could be. I strained my eyes to get a better look at whatever this was. I still couldn't quite make it out, so I decided to turn up my headlights to their max setting. Doing that revealed a man standing in the middle of the road, waving a lit-up traffic conducting stick. You know, those little baton things that are intended to grab the attention of roadway users. He was also wearing a high-visibility vest. I wondered if there was some kind of construction going on up ahead. With even a little bit of thought, though, I realized that didn't make a whole lot of sense. Not only was it Sunday night, approaching 1 a.m., there were no road signs or anything whatsoever to indicate there was work supposed to be going on here. As I drew closer to the traffic maintenance worker, at least that's what I presumed he was, he guided me with his lit-up baton to pull over. I looked behind him and saw nothing but a dark, open road. No barriers, no temporary traffic lights, no workers of any form behind him. Something was wrong here. This just didn't make any sense. I immediately thought there was something fishy about this situation. This guy also had one of those clear ponchos on that people wear at theme parks. You know, those raincoat things. It wasn't even raining that night, though. What the hell is going on here? I wondered. I pulled my car to a stop, as otherwise I was going to hit him and run him over. I was feeling very nervous now. I watched as he stared at me through my windshield and walked over to the side of the car. He looked in through my windows. Something is wrong here. My brain was screaming at me. He then finally stood a little off to the side and indicated with his baton that I was clear to keep on going. I didn't like this. I didn't want to go any further down this path. I was nervous of where he was directing me to go. For the record, I'm a woman in my late 20s, and I was sure I couldn't trust this man. Even though I'm terrible at reversing, I decided to back up to the best of my ability. There was enough space in the road that I would be able to do a 26-point turn or something to get out of there. As soon as I started backing up, though, the maintenance worker's expression changed. He looked surprised, then angry, and desperate all at once. It was unbelievable. He started running toward my car. I let out a scream. This was no maintenance guy at all. He was scaring me. I knew I needed to get out of here. I gunned it as hard as I could in reverse to try and get back away from this man. I had to be careless and not care about bumping into some of the trees, rocks, and bushes that lay at the sides of this narrow road. I also had to pray that no car was going to come up from behind me, too. I watched in horror as he began to catch up to me. I had to keep checking behind me, as well as keeping an eye on him. It was incredibly stressful. Eventually, I managed to create enough distance between us to allow me to fully turn the car around. There was a wider portion of the road that I used to do this in. I managed to get away from that guy. I just keep thinking of how there wasn't any traffic lights or construction signs in the area. Just one lone maintenance worker stood on the road alone in the dark. This was no ghost story or anything paranormal. This was a real person with real bad intentions. I sometimes wonder what may have been waiting for me further down that road if I kept going. An ambush? Tire spikes? Something even worse? I found it very creepy how he searched over my car, saw I was alone, and then waved me onward. Then, when I didn't do what he wanted, he tried to give chase to me. Needless to say, I never used that shortcut again. I've only ever had one experience that has truly frightened me. I guess some people have had a lot more experiences than me. I don't know if that makes them unlucky or me unlucky. This happened after I started living alone for the first time. I flew the nest, so to speak, and it felt so liberating to have my own place to call home. I rented an apartment, and across the road from the front of my apartment building was this large public park. During the day, it would be filled with mothers and children, playing and laughing on the playground or strolling through the green, luscious park area. It looked to me like a nice place to socialize for parents and children. One night, reasonably early into my new tenancy, I found myself at a real loss. I didn't really know what I wanted to do for the night. In the end, I decided on heading down to the local DVD rental store to pick up a movie to watch. I had the following day off, and it didn't matter to me that it was later than I'd usually start watching movies. It was around midnight when I left my place. The rental store stayed open until 3 a.m., so I had no worries getting there and back in time. When I got there, though, I found their selection to be a bit sparse. I mean, it was the weekend, so I guess that most of the popular films they carried had already been rented out by other people. There wasn't much on offer that really spoke to me. I ended up picking up something that looked mildly interesting, and then left for home. As you can imagine, the streets were very quiet at that time of night, especially in my new suburban area. It was peaceful, and the night seemed very still. I remember fishing out my pack of smokes from my jeans pocket and realizing I only had one left. I lit it and changed my direction. I was approaching my building, but I needed to turn around. The only stores open at that time of night would have been the convenience stores. I knew there was one just on the other side of the park opposite my building. I headed into the park with my DVD rental still in hand, cigarette in my mouth. There were only 4 streetlights in the entire park, and on a dark night like this night, it made things very eerie. I could hear distant shuffles and scuttles of the things that came out when it was dark, the night chorus of insects in the trees and bushes. I tried my best to pay these denizens of the dark not too much mind, as they were minding their own business. I focused on my goal of getting to the convenience store and grabbing up some smokes. That was when I heard something so jarring that it caused me to stop dead in my tracks. I heard a child's voice, and it sounded like it was coming from somewhere in the right-hand corner of the park. Immediately, I was suspicious. Why would there be a kid out here at this time of night? I looked toward the area I thought I heard the voice coming from, but I couldn't see anyone there. I mean, it was extremely dark, but I thought I might have been able to at least make out a silhouette if there was really someone there. I couldn't, though. There was no one to be found. I thought this was very creepy. I decided it was better to push on and get out of the park as soon as possible. As I continued walking, though, I continued to think to myself, if there really was a child out here in the middle of the night, would I be able to live with myself if I just ignored them and left them alone? A part of my mind told me this could have been an animal. Its cry merely sounded like that of a child. I ignored this part of my mind. I knew deep down that I wouldn't be able to rest easy that night if I left the park without at least going to check things out a bit. And that's what I did. I walked towards the sound of the child's voice that I heard. I stepped off the park's pathway and out into the darkness. I really wish that I hadn't gone to check it out. I found myself arriving at the swing area. I noticed when I drew closer that there was a bouquet of flowers, along with drawings and messages which had clearly been made by children. It was an incredibly sad sight to behold. I felt the corners of my mouth forming a frown. I guessed I was looking at some kind of memorial, the sight of a poor little one that lost their life in that spot. I stood there in silent contemplation for a while, when right before my very eyes, the swing began to swing back and forth on its own, and only one of them. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I felt glued to the spot as I stood watching the swing as though someone was inside. I swear I also began to hear a child's voice, though I couldn't make out what the voice was saying due to the creaking and clunking of the swing's chains. I thought it was absolutely bizarre and definitely creepy. I managed to regain some control over my legs at that point, and before I knew it, I was slowly backing away from the swing, back toward the path I had wandered from. The swing continued to rock back and forth. I raced to the convenience store and got my incredibly necessary smokes, then took the long way home, bypassing the park completely. I was so freaked out. I remember my hands were trembling as I put the key in my lock. I don't know if the following is related, but when I woke up the next day, there were 2 little muddy handprints on my front door and a trail of tiny muddy footprints coming from the communal hall, as if a little one had walked right up to my door. I got shivers when I saw that. I couldn't help but think of the park from the night before. That was a little much for me. I went back to stay with my parents for a night or two, and then started searching for another apartment. I don't know if I was being a little rash there or what, but I honestly felt like something called out to me and tried to follow me home. Probably a wandering lost spirit that needed some sort of help, but I'm sorry, I don't want to have anything to do with that. This happened when I was in kindergarten. I grew up with a sister, and at one point we got bought a set of Hena dolls by our grandparents. For context, Hina Matsuri, also known as the Doll Festival or Girls' Day, is an annual event celebrated in Japan on March the 3rd. It's a time for families to get together and pray for happiness and well-beings of their daughters. One of the main traditions of this festival is the display of Hena dolls, beautiful, intricately crafted dolls that vary in size. It's often considered an honor to have them bought for you, or to buy them for someone else. For example, grandparents buying for their children. We didn't have a really big set of dolls, though. Not like some of the grand ones you might see. We had quite a small and compact set. 2 dolls sat snugly in a case. When Hina Matsuri came along, my parents displayed the dolls in the living room, as is tradition. When the month was over, the dolls would go back to their spot in the hallway on a shelf. They had thread-like eyes and small mouths. At some angles, it almost looked as if they were grinning, depending on how you observed them. Overall, they were rather expressionless, though. If you've ever seen one, you'll know what I'm trying to describe. I've never really had much interest in the dolls myself, but I did admire their intricate details. One night, I got up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. Let me just explain the layout of my parents' home quickly. The bathroom was downstairs across the hall, and you had to go through the living room to gain access to it. At that time of night, the house is dark and still. Well, not exactly dark all the time. My mom had these sensor light things which provided a tiny bit of light. Just not all that much. My mom bought those after my sister and I clattered into the table one too many times trying to get to the bathroom. I skipped through the lounge and then into the hall, finally to the bathroom. There was a little turn you had to make at the exit of the lounge. Basically, you exit, turn right, and the bathroom is right at the end of the hall. When you leave the lounge, you have to turn your back on the shelf where the dolls are. I noticed when I came back from using the bathroom that the dolls were no longer facing the front. This is the point where I think no one will ever believe me, but I'm just gonna tell you exactly what I saw. It almost seemed as if the dolls were shaking their heads from side to side, and they didn't have their usual painted expressions. They had these weird smirks on their faces. It gave off a strange aura. I ran back to my bedroom and dove under the covers. I spent the whole night shivering. Seeing those dolls behaving so unnaturally really shook me up. I honestly 100% saw those dolls moving on their own, and I have no explanation for why or how that's even possible. No earthquakes were occurring or anything like that at the time. Thankfully, nothing happened for the rest of the night, apart from my lack of sleep from such a disturbing sight. The only thing that I can possibly describe as aftermath is the fact that I developed a strong dislike for those types of dolls. The dolls are still on display at my parents' house. I'm much older than I was when I saw them moving on their own, and their little faces smiling. I shouldn't be afraid of them anymore, but I know deep down I'll never touch those things. I know they're made of a hard material that surely cannot move on its own, and their mouths are painted on. They can't grin. It's been years since I saw what I saw that night. Sometimes I wonder if I was having a hallucination or something. Either way, I don't think I'll ever forget it. When I have a daughter of my own, I'm certainly not purchasing one of those dolls for them. One night at around 2 a.m. or so, I was laying on my bed reading a book. I'm a bit of a homebody, so this wasn't anything out of the ordinary. I'm also a night owl as well, so I'm usually always up late at night. Something that was very unusual, though, was the sound of thunderous banging at my door. Especially at that time of night, it honestly felt like the entire room was shaking. Someone was really throwing their all into those blows that they were landing on my front door. It almost sounded like someone was punching and kicking at it too. For a brief second, I thought that this was some kind of response to excessive noise. You know, someone coming upstairs to tell me to pipe down for being so noisy or something. That didn't make much sense to me though. As I said, I was just lying down on my bed reading a book. I didn't even have music on or the TV. It made no sense. I looked through the peephole and saw a fairly short man who looked to be in his 50s or so. He was kicking and attacking my door furiously. Let me tell you, I don't think I've ever seen someone so angry and fired up in my entire life. I could barely even catch a glimpse of the guy's face because he was so frantically trying to kick the door down. In the few milliseconds that I managed to catch of him, though, he seemed entirely unrecognizable to me. I had no idea who this guy at the door was. I mean, it was entirely out of the blue. I never had any issues with any of my neighbors before. I presumed he must have been a neighbor, because I didn't know where else he would have come from otherwise. I didn't know what else to do in the moment but to open the door and see what this guy wanted. I know that probably sounds like a crazy move, but if I'm honest, I'm not really afraid of confrontation with anyone. It seemed to me to be the best way to get this guy to stop what he was doing. I made sure to keep the chain on the door, though. I was wary of him. I think that keeping the door on the chain that night may have saved my life. Well, there's no thinking. It did save my life. As soon as I created a gap between the door and the door frame, a knife shot through and began to stab randomly at the air in my apartment. It missed me by only a couple of centimeters. It was a close call. Naturally, I stepped back in shock. I saw the guy outside was now trying to pull the door open. He was yanking the door handle with all his body weight and really testing the limits of the strength on the chain. As soon as I saw that he was preoccupied with the door, I rushed back over and tried to get the door to shut. Thankfully, he seemed to be much weaker than me, and I was able to regain control over the situation. I slammed the door shut hard. I was hoping it would trap some of the guy's fingers inside as well, but no such luck, unfortunately. As soon as the door was shut, I locked it and shouted from behind it, asking the man what the hell his deal was. He didn't say a word. He stood there with his back against the peephole, so I couldn't see his face. He called the elevator with his back towards it the entire time. He silently boarded it, and with that he was gone. I don't know why, but that night I kind of wrote it off in my mind as a case of mistaken identity. Maybe he came to the wrong place to vent his anger. Maybe there was a neighbor around who did something to make him hold a grudge against them, and he picked the wrong apartment. I thought that would be the end of it. I know how naive I must sound. I was really downplaying the whole guy with a knife almost stabbing you thing. In hindsight, I can see that now, but I was living a different, more reckless lifestyle back then. Let me just say it like this. I wasn't always lying in bed reading books. I managed to get myself off to sleep that night without much issue. Mad, isn't it? About 2 days passed by and I heard the same kind of banging at the door. I could just tell the man with the knife was back. This time I jumped out of bed. I found myself filled with more anger than fear. I was ready for him. I threw my front door open and began screaming at this guy, telling him he had the wrong place and asking him who on earth he thought he was. All sorts of stuff like that. He said something that I couldn't really tell you what it was. He was really annoying me now, so I grabbed a piece of lumber by the door and swung at him, yelling more threats the whole while. He retreated, and I put the piece of wood by the door just in case he came back. I had been planning on putting up some shelves before all this happened. I was really going to let him have it, but something inside me told me it was probably better to call the police and have them deal with it. I guess I didn't want to have to get in trouble by taking things into my own hands, so to speak. I went back inside, and while I was on the phone with the police, I was asked for a description of his appearance. I went to take a look through the peephole. By the way, he had come back in the meantime and started banging and kicking at my door again. I went up to take a look at him, and to my surprise, he had shoved his eye onto the other side of the peephole, like he was trying to look in at me. It was pretty chilling, to be honest. I remember just thinking that this guy was crazy. I mean, I should have reached that conclusion a heck of a lot quicker, since he turned up in the middle of the night and started slamming on my door, trying to stab me with a knife. In the end, 5 or 6 police officers arrived at my place, but by the time they got there, the weirdo at the door was gone. The odd thing about it all was the fact that this happened in one of the colder months, and this guy didn't have a jacket or anything. He was only wearing a t-shirt and shorts. To me, that signifies he's someone who lives in the building. It's an 8-story building, by the way. A lot of people pass through the halls each day. I don't think I could accurately identify the guy. One good thing, I guess, is that the guy seems to have been put off from coming back. I think that's down to the large police presence that night. I think he won't return. I have no idea what upset that guy so much, though. When I was a university student, my friend and I decided to go check out a supposedly haunted location, just for some kicks. During summer vacation, we looked up a bunch of haunted spots on our phones and decided to pick one. It was just under an hour's drive away, some hot spring spot or something. We didn't really expect much in the way of ghosts or anything like that, to be honest. We were expecting to run into a bunch of guys drinking, or some other explorers smashing up the place. It seemed like it could be a troublemaker's hotspot to me. I thought that because when we searched more information for it, some of the sites that wrote about it were these weird biker gang-looking pages. Seemed to be a popular spot in that sort of circle. It took us a while to get there, but as soon as we were getting closer, I thought to myself that this town or village it was in was exactly the sort of place you would expect to find abandoned buildings. There wasn't really much going on there. It was quite rural. It took a while to find the abandoned bathhouse. We parked up in the hotel's car park, which was really close to the Google Map location. It turns out the reason we had a hard time finding it at first was because it was incredibly overgrown. When we finally found the abandoned hot springs bathhouse and hotel, I immediately thought that I did not want to go in there. My friend at that point had already started to head into the decaying building though, so I didn't exactly have much of a choice except to follow him. He was driving the vehicle after all. As we entered, we saw the usual kind of things that you might expect in any abandoned building. Graffiti, broken glass, empty bottles, cans strewn all over the place. The entrance had a lobby kind of area, which was absolutely littered with trash and debris. We were walking around down there and found a map of the floor plan. We discovered that the guest bedrooms were on the 2 floors above us, so we decided to cut short our time on the bottom floor. We wanted to investigate as much as we could before anyone else showed up. As we traveled around the hotel area, I managed to grow more in confidence. I was more than happy to open each of the guest bedrooms and have a look inside. After a while, it started to get a little boring though. All of the rooms looked the same. I guess that's just the way it is with hotels, really. Every time we opened a door, there was the usual furniture looking right back at us. Some rooms even had bedding still. We got to the 6th room along the hallway, and when I went to open the door this time, I found that there was some resistance. It somehow felt heavier than the other doors. I managed to get it open a little after a struggle, and I noticed there were a bunch of mattresses piled up against the door on the floor. I could see them through the gap. I noticed that after I widened the gap a little more, there appeared to be something on these mattresses, something beneath the covers. It seemed strange to me that someone was able to pile these up by the door. Maybe they left through the window or some other way? Because if they didn't, I don't know how they'd be able to stack those mattresses without opening the door to leave themselves. Anyway, I told my friend about how I thought there was something behind the door on those mattresses. We were both really interested to find out what kind of secrets Room 6 held. We kept on shoving the door, and we were able to open it little by little. We had shoved it enough at this point that all we had to do was lift up the blanket on the mattress and see what this dead weight was. Then shove it off and enter the room. We did a rock, paper, scissors for who would have to try to move the mattress away from the door. I ended up losing. I decided that I really didn't want to try and move or touch the covers with my own hands. I decided to look around for a stick or something long. My friend was really impatient, though. He didn't want to keep the door open. He was tired of dealing with the resistance. I wasn't able to find anything, so I ended up using my foot. I aimed and flicked my toes at the covers to try and hook them up so I could kick them away. I managed to catch the covers with my toe and flicked it up. For the briefest moment, my friend and I caught sight of something we shouldn't have seen. There was a hand under the covers. We were both frightened by the sight of it and ran out of the room and down the hall. Somehow, we didn't leave the building, though. We had a little discussion and decided to go back. We wanted to check if we were just seeing things or something. I fully expected the hand to be gone when we went back, like it was some sort of apparition. To my surprise, when my friend lifted off the covers, we saw a person under them. Technically not a person any longer, I suppose. He was no longer with us. It was clear we would not be able to do anything to help him, except to call the police and make a report about our findings. After speaking to the local police, we were given a stern lecture and official warnings about our little stint in urban exploration. We were questioned too about the body, but we had no answers. We had no clue what happened to that guy in the 6th room. I did find out a little more information later. The incident was reported in the local news. The death was deemed suspicious. That's all I can really tell you. Sometimes there are scarier things in abandoned buildings than ghost stories. A few years ago, I used to travel around Japan, taking photos. I was really into photography. I was particularly interested in taking shots of abandoned buildings. I found a service area along a highway that looked to me as if it had been long abandoned. I mean, there was no doubt that the building was at the very least closed. It was boarded up and looked to me like it had been closed down for years. Everything on the outside was weather-worn. No one was taking care of it. That's when I saw my opportunity. I remember it being a very foggy day. There was poor visibility on the roads, which actually helped my case if I wanted to sneak in and out without anyone calling the cops on me or the cops finding me themselves. I pulled into the service area and got out of my vehicle to take some photos of the exterior of the building. I loved the way it looked in the fog. This was out along mountain roads, by the way, so the fog was even more impressive as I was quite high up. I guess it would be called mist if it's in the mountains, but either way, I digress. After finishing taking some photos of the outside, I managed to gain access to the interior through a broken window. The service area was 2 stories high. I imagine the first floor might have been used for drinks and snacks or something, and the top floor might have been for restaurants and public toilets. Since I was on the first floor, I took some photos down there. After a while, I started to notice, though, there were some sounds coming from upstairs on the 2nd floor. Occasionally, I have encountered homeless people living in abandoned buildings, so I wondered if that was the case this time as well. Other times, it would be a bunch of youths in the building, smashing up the place and doing who knows what. I was somewhat afraid that someone dangerous could be in there with me, so I called out to them, "Hello, is anybody up there?" I waited in silence in the dark, abandoned service area. I couldn't hear any more noises coming from the 2nd floor for a little while. After about a minute passed, though, I heard the sound of someone dragging something while walking around up there. Well, at least that's what it sounded like to me. The noises from above echoed all around. The acoustics were incredible in there. I felt my brow get a little sweaty now. The picture as I saw it was one of a person refusing to respond and making me aware of their presence. Of course, I wondered if whoever was up there had even heard me or not, though. Maybe I just hadn't been loud enough. I walked over to the foot of the stairs, crunching on broken glass as I went. I shouted once more. "Hello? Is anyone here? I'm just taking a couple of photos. I mean you no harm. Do you mind if I come up there and take photos on the second floor? I promise I won't be long." I heard my own voice reverberate through the service area, and I knew that I'd been loud enough this time. I waited on bated breath for a reply from the second floor. I was expecting a voice, but that wasn't the type of reply I got. Instead, I heard what sounded like someone hitting something very heavy on the ground, like a metal bat or something. It was slow and steady, this intimidating banging sound on something metallic, just a banging ringing out over and over. I called out that I was sorry and began to panic. I didn't really know what to do, in all honesty. As soon as I called out again, the banging sound got more aggressive and even quicker. It was as if the aggressive banging was telling me to hurry up and get out of there. One thing I noticed, though, was the fact that this banging sounded as if it was getting closer to the top of the stairs. Where I heard it coming from before was somewhere near the back of the top floor, but now it was getting closer and closer. It was so loud that I could feel the vibration shaking down the stairwell as they approached. I didn't want to stick around to find out what this was. I took off running as fast as I could and literally leapt through the broken window I'd carefully climbed in through. I ran to my car without looking back. It was only when I started my engine that I noticed the palm of my hand was bleeding. I must have cut it getting through the window. My steering wheel was covered in my own blood, but I didn't let that slow me down. I wanted to get away. I really didn't know what was up there. I looked it up on the internet to see if there were any kind of blog postings about the place, and I was able to find a couple ghost hunter blogs about the service area. They claimed to have heard voices, banging sounds coming from the second floor, and various other things. I can attest to one of those for sure. One thing I'm a little cautious over, though, is attributing these noises to the paranormal. The blogs I read all seemed to believe there was for sure some kind of paranormal activity going on up there, but I feel like that wasn't the case. I can't quite put my finger on if it was a prank or if it was an evil person of some sort. Maybe it really was some kind of evil entity, something that made the rundown service area its home. I can't say for sure, but whatever it was pretty dang scary. About 10 years ago, exploring abandoned buildings was very popular in my friend circle. I lived on the outskirts of my prefecture. Homes and businesses were becoming derelict due to depopulation. These abandoned buildings were not maintained or managed by anybody. There were no security guards or anything like that. So, to the young boys that made up our friend group, these buildings made great places to explore. Now, when I say abandoned buildings, I'm not talking about abandoned schools or hospitals or anything big scale like that. Nothing that would catch the attention of any channels or streamers. I'm talking about regular old houses. Most of the houses around here were dilapidated. Walls were falling down, windows had been smashed, the roofs had fallen in. They were really great for easy in and out access, and that's exactly the kind of place we like to explore. We heard a rumor about one of the houses. Some kids used to talk about it at school. In the living room of one of them was supposedly this black telephone. You know, the kind with the wheel that you have to wind with your finger. They're pretty rare these days, right? Anyway, rumor had it that the phone would ring every now and then. The idea of catching the phone ringing after sneaking in was very alluring. I loved that rumor because it wasn't a rumor about the house being haunted or something. It was just about a phone that might ring if you went in there. Well, who's calling? Who's doing the ringing? I found myself daydreaming about it at school from time to time. For me, it was just the right amount of scary to warrant an investigation, and the location was the right amount of distance for my friend group to cycle to. When it was dark out, of course. There were 4 of us in total. We headed there a couple hours after school had finished up. The house with the black phone was located a little ways away from our residential area, somewhat up toward the mountains. As we approached the house, it was clear that it was severely overgrown with weeds, just like the kids at school said it would be. The plants grew tall and stretched all the way to the front door. A lot of people must have explored this house, though. There was a man-made pathway to the door through all the weeds and such. We went up to it and pushed it open. It was almost off its hinges. I felt my heart rate rising as we made our way into the living room in search of the mysterious black phone. We looked all around the living room. It was incredibly dusty in there. There was a stopped clock that hung on the wall, and the calendar was from years and years ago, the Showa era. The black phone was just below the calendar, on a little telephone table. A dust-encrusted notepad was next to it. We decided to take a look around the house before we did anything with the phone. I guess we were waiting to see if it would ring or not. There was nothing much else of interest in there. The rest of the rooms in the house were pretty empty. It was a pretty small home, too, so it didn't take much time to look the place over. After looking around for a while, we returned to the living room where the black phone was. We decided to wait around it and see if it would eventually ring. We stood around it, anxious and excited. After a while of nothing happening, though, we started to get a bit impatient. We were all agreeing with each other that it was likely nothing but an urban legend. At that point, we started for the door to leave, when all of a sudden, we heard the sharp trill of the telephone ringing out. It was so loud. The black phone was ringing. We all held our breath and froze in place. In that quiet, abandoned house as dusk approached, all that could be heard was the ominous sound of that telephone ringing, echoing throughout the entire space. We probably should have just left right then and there, but something urged me to pick up the phone. Before I could give it a second thought, I found myself approaching and extending my hand toward the receiver. I heard my friend's gasp as I put it close to my ear and began to listen. This was the moment I had dreamed of. It was finally here. There was something there. I just couldn't make out what it was. It was as if something was trying to communicate, but it was through a weird buzzing noise. It didn't sound like a call coming from nearby. It sounded like a cell phone coming from somewhere far away, somewhere underground or something. I could hear a voice, though. The voice was creepy. We all passed the phone around and took turns listening in. There were constant sounds from the person on the other end. It was the strangest thing, and it was very frightening to me. One of my friends who was having a turn listening to the phone suddenly shouted no and dropped it, then ran out the door. We followed in pursuit. We were freaking out. We jumped on our bikes and pedaled like mad all over the mountain roads back down towards our town. The friend who shouted no and split never told us why he did. He said he heard something that he didn't want to hear, but what that secret that he knew was, he wished that no one else would know. I can only guess as to what he heard. For a while after that, we spent our days in fear. Every time our phones would ring, we would expect the other person to be the owner of that mysterious voice that had called the black phone. Even when I could see caller ID, I would still doubt that they would truly be on the other end of the phone. After 3 days, I began to feel a bit less worried. Then a week passed, and then a month, and nothing strange happened to myself or any of my friends. We were not cursed or anything like that. The house has since been demolished, but I think it stood dormant for about 20 years in total. Now it's gone, and it just lives on as a scary experience in our minds. Nothing much more. One thing that's plagued me after it all, though, was how did the phone in the abandoned house even ring? I find that so creepy. I mean, surely the phone line would have been disconnected after the 20 years of abandonment, right? Even if it was still working. Why would someone call that abandoned house anyway? Who was calling? And what were they saying? I think back on those days with fear in my mind, hovering just above the confusion of how it even could have been possible in the first place. I went to one of those matchmaking parties a while back. I was tired of being alone, and I just really wanted to meet a nice guy. I'm a woman, by the way. Now I realize that I was better off staying alone, and you'll soon find out why. I felt that it went kind of well, and I actually ended up being asked out by someone there. The guy wasn't exactly my type, if I'm being honest. I mean, he was pretty good looking, but he was also a little bit immature for me. He was on the younger side, too. I still decided to give him a try. He asked me out for a drive, and I thought that was a little more interesting than sitting in a coffee house sharing awkward silences. He came to pick me up in the morning. I got in his car, and we set off for our driving date. We planned on going to a little tourist location with some great views. We were going to have some lunch and then head home in the evening. It was a nice morning and afternoon, and he managed to convince me that he wasn't quite so immature as my first impressions portrayed him. All in all, it was actually quite a fun date. When it started getting dark out, we set about heading back to our hometown. It was when we were driving home that night, though, that I noticed a change in his behavior. He was starting to act strangely, and the vibes he was putting out were very much, "I don't want you to go home yet." I put up with his unexpected neediness, expecting him to change his attitude once he realized it was making me uncomfortable, but he only got more bossy and needy. The insecurity vibes I was getting were strong. The guy who had made me laugh earlier and who I was keen to have a second date with was gone completely, and now a controlling man was sat in the driver's seat. We had discussed earlier how we both had work the next morning. I thought about that part of our date as I noticed how dark it was getting. He wasn't interested in attempting to converse with me any longer, nor was he interested in trying to make me smile or laugh. With how late it was getting, I decided I needed to ditch him as soon as I was able to get out of the car. For the plan to work, I needed him to stop somewhere, though. Instead, we were continuing down dark country lanes where there wasn't any opportunity to stop at all. I bided my time, and when I saw the lights of a convenience store up ahead, I said aloud the sentence I'd been practicing in my mind for the last 15 minutes. "Hey, do you mind pulling over? I need to use the bathroom." He agreed, and I thought I'd get away from this weirdo. I expected him to pull over into the convenience store's parking lot, but instead he zoomed right past it. "Hey, why didn't you stop?" I said. He replied immediately. "I know a public restroom a bit closer to home." I hated that he could have easily stopped, but he didn't do so. It turned out he wasn't technically lying, but he drove us out to the middle of nowhere and stopped next to a lonesome public bathroom. I doubted there was even cell reception, but I checked my phone before getting out. I noticed I did have one bar. I figured I would be able to guide someone to come here to pick me up, or at least share my location. I got out of the car, stood up, and stooped down to pick up my handbag. I grabbed one handle and turned to walk to the bathroom when I felt some resistance, like my bag was stuck. I looked back and saw my date was holding the other handle of my bag, preventing me from taking it with me. I stood there stunned. I couldn't believe this. Could this guy get any worse? My eyes met his, and his face turned into a grimace. If you're just using the bathroom, then you don't need this. I had just dropped my phone into my handbag, so I couldn't even grab that. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't be left out in the middle of nowhere with no bag, no phone, and no coat. I wasn't really paying attention to what roads we'd been on, so I didn't know how long it would take me to get home. Reluctantly, I had to get back in the car. We set off, and I had to hide my fear from him. I didn't want him to think he had some sort of power over me. I didn't want to give him that victory. The next thing I tried was suggesting that it was really hot and I needed something to drink. I was surprised that he didn't need all that much convincing. I guess he was thirsty too. I mean, at this point, we'd been driving around and around for hours. As we approached a convenience store, he parked in the farthest spot away and said he would be right back. He darted out of the car, and I thought to myself, now's my chance. I tried to make a break for it as he ran into the store, but the door would not budge. He came back and had a big smile on his face. As soon as he opened his door, I shot across his seat and pushed my weight against it. This caused him to back off a bit. I told him that if he didn't leave me alone, I would be calling the police. One of the convenience store members stepped out at the perfect time to take some garbage bags out and was alerted by the exchange. When he realized that he was being watched, my date tutted at me and shook his head. He got into his car and sped away, leaving me there all on my own. I called a taxi and got myself home. I was shaken up but tried my best to hold it together until I was behind a closed door. Then it all came out. I was really upset. I later found out when I spoke to the police about him that he stalked his ex-girlfriend and had an official police caution just a month before we went on our driving date. It feels amazing to be saying that I got home in one piece because I truly don't know what that guy is capable of. Hopefully, I never run into him again. A few years back, I had a very frightening experience while I was out driving. It was the Friday before the Christmas break, and I was driving along a national highway at night to visit my long-distance partner. I finished work a little later than I wanted to, so by the time I headed out on the roads, and even before I left, it was already getting dark out. As my journey progressed onward, I noticed that the cars on the road gradually decreased in number as I got further from the city center. I was tired, but I was really looking forward to seeing my boyfriend. I decided to take a short break as to not cause an accident. He lived far from my city, so I guessed I had another 2 hours drive before I got to his town. I got back on the road, and I was in the zone. I drove a while listening to some music. I didn't even care about what kind of time it was. When I checked the dashboard clock, it was just half after 1 in the morning. It was around this point that the smooth national highway roads ended, and I was into winding mountainous roads. Luckily, there were no other cars on these winding roads, so I was able to keep at my own pace without being rushed. I kept things to what I would describe as a comfortable speed. I was enjoying some tunes on the radio. However, when I rounded a hairpin corner, the radio suddenly fell silent. At first, I thought it was because I was out driving in the middle of nowhere and the signal had dropped out. It did that weird static buzzing hiss thing that the radio does when it's searching for signal. I put up with it for a while in the hope that I would find the station again, but I couldn't do so. Then something else began to happen though. I began to hear a faint voice coming in through the storm of static. I thought that it might have just been crossed channels, and hoped that it would be fixed soon. Something even stranger happened. It suddenly felt as though someone was jerking the steering wheel to the left. This caused me to slam on the brakes and pull the car to a stop at the side of a mountainous road. Along this pitch-black road, the only light source that was available was the one coming from my own headlights. I didn't want to listen to the static anymore, so I turned off the engine for a second. It was a cold night because it was December. As soon as the heater was shut off, the windows began to fog. It must have been very cold outside. I realized I was shaken up. I was wondering what the heck just happened. I had no idea what that sudden force was that seemed to direct the steering wheel. Needless to say, I was scared of what I just experienced. Picture it. It was the middle of the night when something completely unexpected and something unexplained happened that was life-threatening. My heart was pounding in my chest. I needed a distraction. I tried to calm myself down and started the engine again with hopes I would get some kind of radio signal. It was still static, but all of a sudden that same voice came through louder than all the other crosstalk I had heard that night, and that voice said this: "You will be with me soon." I honestly broke out in goosebumps. I didn't know what else to do but to shut off the radio and speed away from that area. I wanted to get out of those dark mountain roads and get back onto some highways with some street lights. It only took me another 10 minutes to get back to the bright lights of the highway, but the whole while I drove through those dark, winding mountain roads, that cold voice I heard through the sea of static ring in my ears. The voice sounded impossibly cold to me, like it couldn't have come from someone living. I felt so scared for the remainder of the drive. When I finally arrived at my boyfriend's place and got a chance to tell him about what I experienced, he brushed it off and said I just got worked up because I was overtired. He essentially called it an auditory hallucination. I don't think it was, though. It's something I don't think I'll ever understand. Maybe something happened out there on that road, or maybe it's just like my boyfriend says, a conjuration of an overtired mind. Just to be on the safe side, whenever I go see him now, I choose not to drive along that road in the mountains. So, when I was 17, I had just gotten my first car. One day, I drove my brother and myself over to the dentist. While we were waiting in the lobby, I noticed someone had parked really badly right next to my vehicle. Since it was brand new, I was pretty paranoid about it getting scratched up or something. My brother went in for his appointment, and I decided to go move my car to a safer spot. After I parked in that new spot, I was walking back to the office. Just before I could cross the parking lot to get inside, a minivan with super tinted windows, so tinted they had this weird bluish hue, pulled up close to me and almost hit me. I thought it was strange, but I simply walked around it. As I was heading to the door, I noticed a reflection in the glass. I saw a guy getting out of the van and starting to follow me. At first, I didn't really think much of it and just started walking faster, but then he started to really chase after me. That's when I realized, okay, this is actually happening. I started running too. I barely managed to reach the door before he could get his hands on me. The door was glass, and I could see his reflection in it. He was reaching out, only inches away from me. He looked like a totally regular guy, too, wearing a button-up shirt and khakis, which made the whole thing even more surreal. I ran inside, and he did not attempt to follow, probably because he didn't want to be seen. I was completely shocked and kind of in denial about what just happened, because it all went down so fast. I looked out the window and saw him holding a purple cloth to his hand. No idea what that was about. He looked all around, then got back in the minivan and sped off. I told the receptionist what happened, but I was still pretty shaken up and confused. All of the events happened in less than a minute. I wonder what would have happened to me if I hadn't made it inside. When I was 21, I worked as an assistant teacher. I had plans to visit friends in another state and intended to spend my summer there. Because of this, I subleased my apartment and stayed with my friends for a couple of weeks before I left. My parents lived in a rural area of Wisconsin, just south of Madison. I really loved to run. I would jog in a park near my parents' house after work. This park was basically a mile loop that was uphill the first third of the trail, level for one third, then downhill for another third. It was heavily wooded, and the upper portion was bordered by a rock quarry. In retrospect, it was probably a stupid idea to jog there all alone. There was a small gravel parking area at the entrance of the trail. I hit the trail after work one day, and on my way uphill, I suddenly started to feel a sense of panic. I turned around and actually started to run back down the way I'd come. I decided to just complete one loop, though. I told myself it was really hot, and I was just making an excuse to not exercise in the muggy heat of late spring. Even still, I couldn't shake this intense feeling that something was extremely wrong. As I was coming in the end of the loop, I could see the parking area. There was now a cargo van parked right next to my car. I could see someone in the van, but as I became visible through the trees, they were no longer in the front seat. My car was not locked because there was never anyone at this remote park on a weekday afternoon. There was ample space in the parking area, which made it extra strange that this mysterious cargo van had parked right next to me. I decided that I didn't want to risk it. I ran across the highway and asked a man who happened to be outside on his riding mower if he could walk me to my car. I explained to him my concern that there was someone hiding in the van, and he agreed to help me out and make sure I got there safely. I don't know what would have happened if I had not talked myself into completing that one loop. I think my intuition was what was causing me to freak out, not the heat. And that was my last solo jog ever, in an area that wasn't heavily populated. Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. This first started happening 15 years ago and would take place over the next 13 years of my life. It started in the summertime, about 4 months after we had moved to a new house in a different state. I was 9 years old at the time and didn't really have any friends in the area. One day, I was out in the front yard helping my dad with some yard work. He would mow the front and back yards, and I would either pick dandelions out of the ground or water the plants at the front of the house. Not super helpful, I know, but I was 9 and was not allowed to do anything with the lawnmower, besides maybe pull the cord to start it. My dad had just finished the front yard and moved his way to the backyard while I stayed in the front to finish things up. I remember seeing a package in front of our door and going to pick it up, and that was when I first turned around and saw him. A man in his late 30s, with long dark hair tied in a ponytail, wearing a plain white t-shirt, black pajama pants, and no shoes or socks. He was standing right at the end of our street, with his arms crossed and staring directly at me. For context, my house is 4 houses down from the end of the street. At the end, there's a road that forms a T-shaped intersection. On the other side of this intersection from my house, there are 3 homes, with one lined up with the middle of my street and the other 2 houses sitting to the right of it. To the left of the house lined up with my street is an old steel treating factory that existed surrounding by houses in our neighborhood, and at the time was active 24/7. This man was standing in front of the house lined up with my street. He was standing right at the edge, in front of what I assumed must be his home. He would just stare at me. As soon as I saw him, I immediately froze and stared back at him, with a sudden uneasy feeling washing over me. The longer I looked at him, the weirder this began to seem. To my 9-year-old mind, this man was dressed very strangely. That was an immediate red flag already, but the creepiest thing was his face. He had absolutely no expression of any kind, just this dead, piercing stare, looking directly at me. For 2 minutes we stared at each other, with him not even blinking. Eventually, the uneasy feeling built up enough for me to walk myself down off the porch and over to the side of our house, never looking away from the man. When I made it out of sight, I ran to the backyard to tell my dad about that strange experience. I came up to him as he finished mowing the backyard and described what I had seen. He told me that he had seen this man the other day doing the same thing, except just staring straight down our street. Arms crossed, same outfit, just like how I'd seen him. After that, my dad told me he thought the man seemed off, and to stay far away from him. Unfortunately, that would not be the last time I saw that man. From that point on, I would see him much more often. I would be riding in the car with my family, or outside doing something in our yard or on our block, and look over, just to see him standing in the same spot, intensely staring. He wasn't there 24/7, but at least 3 days a week I would see him outside, sometimes for 5 or more hours at a time. If not staring at me, he would be staring at someone walking their dog, or a car passing by. Once I tried to figure out his schedule, so I wouldn't have to be around him as much. It felt too creepy, though. He would start scanning his head, looking around for people to lock onto. Just really strange behavior. Now, some of you may be thinking, hey, he's just staring and not really doing anything. That's not that bad, right? Well, sadly, I would find out later that things were far worse than I could imagine. Fast forward about 9 years. I was 18 years old now, and looking to get a job to save up for my first vehicle. I hadn't really been able to save any money up to that point, and my parents weren't in any position to help me with purchasing one. I knew I had to try and find a job that would be easy for me to get to, and that would pay me enough to hopefully buy a cheap car quickly. Lo and behold, the steel treating factory next to the creepy man's house had a now hiring sign out front. I decided that a 2-minute walk to work had to be worth it, even if it meant walking by that man's house. I had seen this guy doing his routine for almost a decade at this point, and figured it wasn't going to be a problem. I applied and ended up getting the job. It was hard work, which consisted of heavy physical labor and keeping a constant pace. Nothing I hadn't expected, though. I started off fairly slowly, but ended up getting much better and able to do tasks much faster. About 3 months in, I was assigned to work on a machine I had not previously worked on, located in the loading dock. From the loading dock, I had a clear view of the wooden fence that separated the factory loading zone from the man's house, as well as his front driveway, where he would normally stand. I couldn't see the man standing at his post this time, but I did notice a large hole in the fence, which seemed to have been made in some kind of accident. The fence was not broken cleanly. There were splinters and cracks where the hole had been made. I asked the floor worker who was with me if he knew anything about this. This actually got us into a much longer conversation about the man. Ronnie had been at the steel treating factory for over 15 years and had seen the man doing his strange routine more than once. According to Ronnie, the hole in the fence had been made by the man. He told the managers of the plant that it had been an accident with his truck, but that's not all. He went on to tell me that this neighbor man actually ran a daycare from his home, an unregistered business that led to the police being called on him more than once. This surprised me, as I had never seen police cars at his house before. After Ronnie told me this, something else occurred to me. When looking at the man's house, whenever his van wasn't sitting in the driveway, you could see one of those children's mini playgrounds with a slide and toys built into it, the kind toddlers would play with. This always struck me as odd, because never once in those 9 years up to that point had I ever seen anybody else come or go from his house, especially not any children. I never really dedicated much thought to it though. After Ronnie told me this, I thought back to when I'd first seen him as a 9-year-old, and all the other times he'd stared at me growing up. I began wondering if he had secretly been plotting to try and get me over to his unofficial daycare. I couldn't really do anything about it though, so I just filed the story into the back of my head as something I would not be surprised to find out was actually true. I left that job not long after. I saved the money I needed for the car and was able to make my way into a career field I had been hoping to make it into. Fast forward 3 years later, to one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me, and the reason for my posting this. At this point, I had moved away from home. I ended up having to move back with my parents for reasons I'm not getting into. I had also met my girlfriend, and we would spend some nights driving over to my parents' house to watch old movies or play games with my janky basement setup. By this point, my girlfriend was also aware of the creepy man, but paid him as much mind as anybody else did. As creepy as his behavior was, he wasn't breaking the law by standing there, and our lives already had too much going on for us to be focusing our time and attention on this weirdness. One night, I was driving home with my girlfriend for a normal night of watching some movies. I didn't want to block my mother's car in our single-lane driveway, so I started parking in the grass patch behind our house. Behind our house was an alley that ran past everybody's backyards. One day on the way home, I ended up going right past his area, taking us right past him with him standing and staring us down. I locked eyes with him very briefly as we drove past him. I turned to go into the alley behind my house. There's where things got scary. For some reason, I don't know why. As we passed by the man this time, I got a bad feeling. A feeling similar to the first day I'd seen him. A gut-wrenching, something is wrong kind of feeling. I decided to look in my driver's side mirror, and to my horror, the creepy man had actually left his post and was moving in our direction. I can honestly say that was the first time I had ever seen him not standing completely still. Here he was, moving towards me. As my thoughts began racing, I turned into the alleyway and went 4 houses down, turning into the grass patch behind the garage in our backyard. I told my girlfriend what I'd seen and how strange this was. I didn't want to freak her out. From the angle that my car was parked, I could turn around in my driver's seat and stare at the alleyway. I would be able to see if he was coming and see if he rounded the corner. My eyes widened and my heart started beating fast as I saw him walking down the alleyway right up to the edge of the wooden fence and pausing. After a few moments, he seemed to change his mind about something. He turned around and started walking back down the direction he'd come from. I waited about 2 minutes before getting out of my car and approaching the edge of the fence. I checked to see that he was gone. I've thought quite a bit about this since it happened 2 years ago. I don't know if he recognized me or the house I had pulled into, or why he chose that night to follow me and my girlfriend. I don't really care, to be honest. I moved out shortly after that happened, and I'm now living with my girlfriend, who today is my fiancée. There's a local dollar store in my neighborhood that's pretty close to my apartment. It's closer to my place than any other stores like Target, Walmart, or the grocery store. Because of that, I used to go there basically all the time. I would say I was there twice a week at least just to get whatever I needed. I would take a 2 to 3 minute drive to there from my place. The store was like most dollar stores and was somewhat small. It wasn't usually that busy either, which was also nice. One evening, I went to the dollar store to grab a few things. I walked inside, and like normal, it wasn't that busy. There were just a few people in there, and they were shopping throughout the store. I began looking for the first thing I was going to buy, when suddenly a woman approached me out of nowhere. This woman had dark hair and was quite short. She was wearing glasses and a black coat. After approaching me, she said she saw me here all the time. I said that yes, I did shop here quite a bit. The woman then described the things I would usually buy and said how she always saw me get the off-brand Gatorade and one particular brand of chips that I really liked. This was kind of weird to me. I mean, how close had she been watching me to memorize all this stuff about me? Why did she even come over to say this in the first place? I said yes and tried to laugh it off. The conversation ended abruptly, with the woman saying she would see me later. I then walked away and continued with my shopping. I didn't see the lady until almost the end of my shopping trip. When I was almost done, I remember I was in an aisle when I happened to look up randomly. I saw the woman walking by, filming me with her phone. She was trying to hide it, but doing a terrible job. I could see her phone was pointed right at me. The woman didn't even look at me and walked past. She began to pretend to look at a product on a shelf about 20 feet away from me. Even though she was looking at some items and not in my direction, she kept her phone facing me the entire time. I was so confused. I thought about confronting her, but instead I decided to just check out and leave. When I started walking away, I saw the woman angle her phone to keep it on me. When I looked over, she quickly moved it away once more. I really wanted to confront her now, but I decided not to. As weird as this was, who knew what would happen if I confronted her directly? As long as something like this didn't happen again, then I wouldn't try to pay it too much mind. I headed up and paid for my items, then left the store. The woman didn't follow me or anything. She stayed inside when I left. After getting out of the dollar store, I headed back home. It was about 2 or 3 days later now. I had gone to the store again. I had sort of forgotten about that woman. This time that I shopped there, I don't remember noticing her at all. The next time I was there, she was right back again. This was roughly a week after our last interaction. It was a little bit later at night, and the dollar store was even more quiet than before. I did not see the lady as I walked in. I was going around the store getting some items I wanted to buy. When I was sort of near the front end of the store, though, I noticed something out of the front windows. The windows looked out to the parking lot, and you could see a good amount of it. There were maybe 3 or 4 cars in the entire lot, but I could see the same woman from before, standing next to my car. She appeared to be either filming it or taking photos of the outside. She also recorded my license plates. When I saw this, I decided to leave. I checked out and kept an eye on the woman the whole time. I watched her as she tried to open one of the doors to my car. Luckily, I'd locked it. As soon as I made it out of the doors, I saw the woman immediately duck behind another nearby car in the parking lot. When I reached my vehicle, I called out to her, asking her what the hell she was doing. I got no response. I knew the woman was still hiding behind that car, but she was not answering me. I didn't figure it would be a good idea to approach her or stick around to say anything else. I just climbed into my car and drove home. I decided after that it would probably be smart not to go back to that store for quite a while, and I haven't been back since then. That was about 6 months ago, and I've not seen that lady again at all. I'm hoping I never do. I work at the small perfume store in a large mall. This mall has literally hundreds of stores inside of it, and the store that I work at is one of the smaller ones. It only requires 1 employee at a time. We sell all kinds of perfumes, as well as a few skin products. Our store is open until the time the mall closes, which is 8 p.m. One time, I was working at the store until 8 o'clock. I would be all by myself for the shift. Normally, the store was pretty quiet. Sometimes, if the mall was really busy, we'd get a lot of customers, but usually there were not that many people in the store at once. I was sitting behind the counter, which faced directly to the entrance, and a large window on the other side of the entrance doors. The day went by as usual for the most part. We got some customers here and there, but it was mostly quiet. At around 5 or 6, though, something really strange happened. I remember that nobody was in the store at that particular time. I was just sitting behind the counter when I noticed this man walking past the store. He was wearing this really creepy-looking mask. Not quite a clown mask, but it looked sort of similar. He then turned and looked into the window right at me. He pressed his face up against the glass. It was quite creepy, but I figured it to be a joke and laughed it off. The man stayed at the window for an uncomfortable amount of time, over a minute. Then he finally stopped and walked a distance away. Before he passed by the store completely, though, he stopped again and looked in once more. He stared for a little while before turning and walking away. Extremely weird. Over the next hour or so, I got a few more customers, and we made a few sales. People would walk past the shop down the mall hallway all the time, but the later it got, the quieter it became. At around 7 o'clock, I saw the strange man yet again. He walked past the shop once more and did not stop. He did turn around to look at me as he passed by, though. It was very interesting, for a lack of a better word. I didn't really know what this guy was doing. Why was he just walking all around the mall? I figured he was probably messing with a lot of people, trying to get a reaction out of them. I didn't see the man for the rest of the time that we were open. At 8 o'clock, I went over to the entrance and closed our glass doors, then locked them up. After that, I just had to finish up by doing a few things. Then I could leave for the night. I went back to the counter and would be able to leave in probably 5 minutes. As I was behind the counter, though, I saw the man had returned. The same guy still wearing his creepy mask. He stopped right in front of the 2 doors and started to stare at me. Then he rushed up to them and tried to open them, but they were locked. After that, he started to walk away. I figured that he was leaving the mall. After all, it was now closed, and no stores would be open anymore. The man did not go out of my sight, though. Instead, when he reached the end, he turned around and walked back, then started pacing back and forth in front of the shop and looking in at me. Almost the entire time, I tried my best to ignore him. Soon, though, I was done with work, and I wanted to leave. Thing is, I couldn't exactly leave with this guy out there waiting for me. I was hoping he would just go away on his own, but he didn't after several more minutes. I was starting to get impatient. I hoped one of the mall security guards would see him and tell him he had to go. By now, he was probably one of the last people left, if not the very last one. He continued to stand around and look at me. Every so often, sometimes he would pace around a little more, but he would never move out of my line of sight. It was like he was just waiting for me to leave. He seemed to know that I was off now, but I wasn't going to leave with this guy out there. I didn't know who he was or what he was capable of. Before, I figured him to be harmless, but now I wasn't quite so sure. This went on for quite a while, when finally I saw one of the mall security guards come into my view in front of the store. He started speaking to the man. I couldn't really hear what was being said exactly. I could just really hear their voices. All I could really make out was their voices. Not long at all after they started speaking, the masked man walked away and out of sight. The security guard followed. There was not too much of an interaction. Most likely, the guard had just told him the mall was closed and he had to leave. Still, I waited a couple of minutes and made sure the guy didn't return. Then, I was finally able to leave the store. I walked the now empty hallways of the mall and out to my car in the parking lot. When I got outside and into the lot, I remember looking to my left. One of the first things I noticed was that the masked man was right there. He was just sort of standing, around 100 feet away. He was near another set of entrance doors, standing on the sidewalk out front. I hoped he would not look over and see me. I walked as fast as I could to get to my car, and I was able to get there okay. I quickly left. When I did, I saw the guy still waiting in the parking lot. I don't know if he was waiting for me to leave or what. Maybe he thought I was going to exit out those other doors. Either way, I'm glad I was able to get out safely and make it back home. After that, I never saw the guy again. I still sometimes wonder what his plans were. My husband and I have been living at this house for almost 5 years now. We lived in a fairly large town, but we lived right on the edge. We had a larger property in a wooded area. Our property had a cabin sort of vibe, with plenty of space for our 2 dogs, 2 German shepherds to run around. We had neighbors close to us, maybe only 500 feet away, but there were enough trees around to make it still feel secluded. On this rainy Thursday night, my husband had gone to play poker with some friends, as they occasionally did. It was at one of his buddies' houses that was about 10 minutes away. I was at home alone with the dogs, watching Netflix and enjoying some ice cream. After the episode ended, it sounded like there was a bit of a break in the rain, so I got up from the couch and let the dogs out to go to the bathroom in the backyard. I would normally go out with them and stand outside, but since it was raining lightly still, I just watched them through the window. The dogs do their business pretty quickly most of the time, but this time they were spending a lot of time sniffing and hovering around our old shed close to the woods in the backyard. My dogs began to bark at the shed and wouldn't stop doing so. Thinking that they had trapped an animal in or near the shed, I stepped out onto the back patio and yelled their names, ordering them to come back inside. The dogs would not stop barking though. I went back inside, grabbed a rain jacket and a flashlight, and put some shoes on. I walked out toward the shed to check out the scene. As I got closer, I noticed a terrible smell filling my nostrils. It smelled like a dead animal. As I approached the shed, shining my flashlight toward it, I got within about 20 feet when suddenly the door of the shed burst open and this small, dirty-looking man jumped out. He couldn't have been much taller than 5 feet. His clothes were in rags, and his hair was a tangled mess. He smelled horrible. He had a shovel from our shed in hand, and took a couple of swings at my dogs, attempting to hit them. Thankfully, he missed. He locked eyes with me for a split second, then dropped the shovel and ran into the woods behind my home. After he disappeared into the woods, I ran back inside and called the cops, then called my husband, telling him to come home right away. The cops came very quickly and searched the wood area behind my house. They ended up finding the man, hiding in some brush close to my neighbor's home. My husband and I ended up finding out a couple of days later that it was a homeless man who had been squatting in people's sheds and garages around town. I'm thankful I had the dogs there with me that night, as I'm not sure what would have happened had I confronted the crazy man myself. This happened many years ago when I was still in college. I was in my junior year at a large university and was rooming with 4 other people who I'd met and become friends with in the dorms. We were renting this older 3-story house together that was just a bit off campus. The house was pretty run down and not in great condition, as a lot of college houses tend to be. My friends and I didn't mind though, because the rent was pretty cheap. Splitting it between 5 people made it even cheaper. It was also a very short walk to campus, which was especially nice. This particular night, it was just me in the home, as all of my roommates were going out to bars. I didn't join them, because I wasn't really feeling it that night. Mostly, I just didn't enjoy myself at bars. I just wanted a relaxing night. I was up in my room on the 3rd floor, just watching a movie and hanging out on my phone, sometime close to midnight. That was when I began to hear something on the stairs, heading up from the 1st level. There was a loud creaking, and somebody moving around on the 2nd level right below me. Being an old house, you could hear a lot of floorboards creaking when somebody was moving around on a stairway or floor. When my roommates would go out to the bars, when they would come back, they'd normally be talking very loudly, and I would know who was back or not. It was odd to me then that I didn't hear any talking at all. I had always been a bit cautious when I'd hear people downstairs, because our door was usually left unlocked. I got up from my bed to go and see who was in our home. Our house had 2 separate stairways because of how large it was, so I stood at the top of one of them and peered down to see if I could see anybody. Whoever was down there must have heard me moving around upstairs, because they'd stopped walking around and were completely silent. At this point, I had the distinct feeling there was somebody in our home who shouldn't have been there. I didn't want to call out and say anything, and I didn't want to move either. I just sort of stood there, frozen in the hallway, at the top of the stairs. Eventually, after what felt like 5 minutes, the person downstairs started moving again. I heard them begin to ascend the 2nd stairway at the other end of the hall from where I was standing. With the stairway now right in front of me, I felt comfortable enough to stay and see who would emerge from the other stairwell. A man who looked to be in his 50s or 60s emerged and stopped as he saw me at the end of the hall. He quickly called out in a raspy voice and said that he used to live here and he was just checking out the place. I didn't believe him. I told him to leave the house right now, or I was calling the police. That made him angry. He started cussing at me and moving toward me down the hall. I ran down the stairway in front of me quickly and pulled out my phone to call the police. As I was on the phone explaining the situation, I was also playing a scary type ring around the rosy game. I could hear the man's movement based on the noise of the stairs and the floorboards. Every time the man would go up or down one stairway, I would move in the opposite direction. He'd then pause and stop moving. After a couple of times going up and down the 2 staircases and avoiding him, I heard him descend the stairs back to the 1st floor and leave through the back door of the house. The cops showed up shortly after, and I described the man to them. I was informed that they would keep an eye out for him and to call right away if he ever came back. From that point out, my roommates and I did a better job of always making sure the doors were locked at all times. One of my roommates had some cash stolen from his room, but otherwise everything was in order. We lived in that house for the rest of the school year and didn't ever see that man again. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in the comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.